Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to head over to Sweden once again, and we're going to revisit a brewery who do some pretty interesting beers, I have to say. So we're going to go to Landskrona today and revisit Brekeriet, who are a specialist brewery in sour beers and wild ales, however you want to call them. And this is one that I'm really quite excited to try because it's named after a cocktail that I really like. So for this one we're having a taste of the Purple Rain. This one comes in at 5.3% and it's a Berliner Weiss. They've added passion fruit and black currants to this one, so it should be pretty nice, and pretty much any beer I've had from Brekeriet has been pretty damn good. Interestingly, this is one of the ones that's particularly highly rated on Rate Beer. I think at a 98 overall out of 100, and as I've told you before, I've always found when it comes to Brekeriet beers that Rate Beer is absolutely useless, because I've had some that have been really lowly rated and I've found them really quite nice. And as I always say, Rate Beer, you know, it's a decent tool. It gives you a little bit of a barometer and it's good to it's good for certain things, but when it comes to certain beers, it just doesn't have it right at all, and I've always found that to be the case with Brekeriet. And these guys are a very good brewery, as I said, specialising in sour beers, and they're always experimenting, so you can always get some really quite interesting things from them. Probably my favourite beer I've had from them so far has been the Sour and Salt, which I believe was part of the regular range at Systembolaget for a while, but they're always putting out different things, and if you're interested in sour beers, then Brekeriet is a really good place to go. So anyway, as is usual with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Brekeriet before. I think this is review number 7 or 8 from these guys. No doubt there will be more. There's all the usual social media. If you want to see more beer reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, prefecture, county, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlist of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you before, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys, and the support that you give the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Brekeriet then. So as I've told you before, Brekeriet were originally based in Djursland, which was just outside of Malmo, but I believe about a year or so ago they moved up to Landskrona in Skåne, which is maybe about 50 minutes or so on the train north of me in Lund. But the company was founded back in 2011 by the Ek brothers. So this is Fredrik, Christian and Andre, and it's a specialist brewery in wild beers using Brettanomyces, and they were the first brewery in Sweden to do this, and they remain the only dedicated brewery to sour beers in Sweden to this day. Temple Brewhouse up in Uppsala do some things as well, but Brekeriet are the only ones who do exclusively sour beers. But the original brewery is based in the old brew house in Djursland, and this was actually a share brewery for local farmers at one point in time. But they brewed their first beers back in 2012, and this brewery had quite a modest production of only 500 litres per brew, which gave them a yearly capacity of around 38,000 litres. But as of 2015, they have their new brewery up in Landskrona, and this one can produce 20 hectolitres per brew, and they now have a fermentation capacity of around 80 hectolitres as well. And apparently they produce their wild bunch beers continuously in Landskrona, but they do some of their kind of sour patch and experimental beers and one-off things down at the brewery in Djursland. I'm not sure if they are still actually brewing in Djursland or if that's the thing, but that was at least last year they were doing that. They may have moved everything to Landskrona, of course, but in 2014 the brewery caused a little bit of a stir actually, because they withdrew from Systembolaget in Sweden, basically citing the bureaucracy with the nationalised system, and they decided to focus on exports abroad. So originally when I went over to Sweden, you had to actually go to Denmark over into Copenhagen to get some of these Brekeriet beers, but they actually came back into Systembolaget from 2016 onwards, and I have to say I'm really quite happy about that, because the quality of beers that these guys are producing is pretty good. But that is one of the big problems in Sweden with the Systembolaget system. It's not, in terms of for craft brewers and things, it has to have a little bit more flexibility than it does, rather than it wouldn't really need that when it's dealing with whiskey distilleries and things like that. But for craft brewers, they do need to kind of change the rules a little bit to make it kind of more streamlined. But yeah, that's all you need to know about the brewery just now. As I said, check out the brewery website in the description below and you can see all the different beers that these guys do. As I mentioned, Brekeriet are quite kind of prolific, so you will always get different things every kind of seasonal release that Systembolaget do, and they do export their beers fairly widely as well. But on the side here it says Sour Patch. Brekeriet Purple Rain is part of our collection of beers known as Sour Patch, fermented with different wild yeast strains and lactic acid bacteria cultures. And it says on the side here they've got wheated malt in here, passion fruit, black currants and lactobacillus. So yeah, this one usually they say whether they're brewed in Landskrona. It just says here Landskrona, so I do wonder if they've shut that fact the brewery in Djurslev as well. So I think it will be this one probably will be brewed up in Landskrona. But you can see one of the Sour Patch beers, and it does just say here Landskrona, and it's got the 3 Eck brothers as well. I think that's new on this bottle. I don't remember seeing that on some of the other ones, but it has this kind of typical Brekeriet style of artwork. It's very simple but really quite classy, and I do like the kind of purple rain stains as well. And there of course is the standard Brekeriet bottle cap. So as I said, 5.3% Berliner Weiss with black currants and passion fruit. So without further ado then, let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Nice little bit of a smoky opening there, quite a lot actually, and we'll get it out into the glass. And you can smell some of those lovely black currants coming out of this beer already. Look at the colour of that, that's really, really nice. And you can see there's a little bit of wheaty sediment in the bottom there, which has given the beer just a little bit more of that haze. It's not actually, for the name Purple Rain, it's not actually purple, it is definitely more of an almost kind of I don't know if it's right to describe it. It's not quite blood red, it's a few shades lighter than blood red, but definitely a nice kind of crimson red colour this beer. There's a half finger of a frothy, kind of pink creamy coloured head on this one. It looks really, really nice actually. 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, and quite a few little ones just going up towards the bottom of the head there. But the head is really fading away just to be a very thin foamy layer. But the aroma of this beer really is beautiful. That lovely kind of red candied fruit ester and some of those blackcurrant notes coming out of it. I always love the smell of blackcurrants because, of course, I don't know if you guys in Sweden tend to have that, but in Scotland we were always given as kids a juice called Ribena, and it was always Ribena blackcurrant, so it's always a little bit nostalgic for me at least. And you can see this beer is really quite hazy. If I put my fingers behind the glass, you can see that it really isn't, there's no transparency to this at all. It is completely hazy, and I'm just looking at the control for the camera. It does actually look almost a little bit purple on the little camera control down here, so it's a really quite nice looking beer this, and the aroma is lovely. But let's take a closer look at that and see how we get on. Yeah, when you go further into it, you definitely get, you know, that kind of telltale lactobacillus note out of it. When you shake it up, it's got this interesting kind of herbal, almost medicinal quality as well. A little bit of earthiness, which is quite interesting. I've never really noticed that before with the sour beers. But yeah, definitely a little bit of that in there. There's that sharp, lemony sherbet kind of tart, citricy note that you expect of the lactobacillus. You can smell some of the passion fruit, but really for me, the passion fruit is quite muted in this one. It's leaning a lot more towards the black currants and some of these candied red fruit esters. You can smell it. It's almost, it's got a little bit of that almost fig, raisiny, plum sort of thing coming out of it, which is interesting. I wasn't quite expecting that. You can smell a little bit, when you let it settle, you can smell a little bit of a nice sort of wheaty, bready character in there as well, which is what you expect of a Berliner Weiss. But this is it's a really interesting smelling beer, this one. As I say, you've got that nice sharp, tart, citricy character, a nice bit of bready, kind of wheaty character out there as well. That kind of herbal, sort of herbal, earthy kind of thing as well, which is quite interesting. But it's a really, to me, it really leans towards the kind of red candied fruit esters, and the black currants are coming out of this one beautifully. The passion fruit, for me, really isn't quite as noticeable as I was expecting. I think other things are kind of covering it up. But it smells really, really quite nice. So as I always say, just take a little bit of time and enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. But we're going to try this one now. So this one is the Purple Rain from Brekeriet in Landskrona in Skåne in southern Sweden. A really nice Berliner Weiss with some black currants and passion fruit. Let's get stuck in. Skål! Yeah, that's a really nice beer. I can see right away why it has that high rating on Rate Beer. As I always said though, particularly for Brekeriet, the Rate Beer system is a bit wonky for these guys, but this is really good. And the thing that's interesting, as I mentioned to you before, probably my favourite beer that I've had from Brekeriet was the sour and salt. I think they've got a really good base recipe for Berliner Weiss, because if I remember correctly, that was a Berliner Weiss as well. And the way that the malty character is coming out in this one, it really reminds me of that. So this one is almost, if you like the sour and salt, but you like more red fruits, I think you're really going to enjoy this beer as well, because to me, it tastes as if this one has the same base recipe, the same kind of malt base and things as the sour and salt did. This is really nice. But yeah, that's lovely. So yeah, as you'd expect with this one, there's a nice, in the middle of your palate where all the malty character is going to come out, there's a nice little bit of a white bready character there. You can get that wheaty smoothness to it, and it's almost a little bit sweet. There's almost a wee bit of a kind of maybe butterscotchy or bread and butter sort of flavour going on there in the middle of the palate too as it progresses. I'm really getting it now. You've seen how long it was since I took a sip of this beer, but it's really, really nice. So in the back corners of the palate, there's a little bit of earthy character. As you come further forward along the sides of the tongue, there's a little bit of that kind of floral aromatic note. There's a wee bit of bitterness in the very front corners of the palate, and then round the front curve of the tongue, you get a little bit of that lighter kind of grassy note. I do wonder if they're using German noble hops in here, because it does have a little bit of that kind of distinct earthy note that you expect from the likes of Tettnanger and Hallertau and Mittelfrüh and all these kind of things. But yeah, I have to say, it's a really nice beer. The base on this one, I think, is very, very similar to sour and salt. So if you like sour and salt, I'm sure you'll like this one, as long as you enjoy some nice red fruity character as well. But around the edge of the tongue, on the front kind of edges of the tongue, that's when you really get this nice tart, sharp, lemony citric note. To me, this one's a little bit more sour than some of the other ones that I've had actually from them. But at the same time, it might just be because I've not drunk a sour beer in a wee while, so that's one of the things you always have to bear in mind when you're reviewing beer as well. But with this one, the fruity character is really interesting. So around the edge of the tongue, the black currants for me come out quite a bit. They come out a lot more in the aftertaste, but in the front part of the beer, or the early part of the beer, it's the nice kind of, the passion fruit is really sitting there. Behind the front curve of the palate, as I always say, that's where usually you get this kind of little oily bubble, where all the fruity esters coming out. For me, just behind there, there's a little bit of an almost kind of candied red fruit ester, or a sort of figgy note to it, which is quite interesting. But yeah, I do like how that comes across. Just pay attention to that behind the front curve of your palate. But the actual additions of fruit, as I always tell you in these reviews, I always find that when you add fruit to a beer rather than kind of extracting the flavours from the hops, the fruity juiciness will always come out around the edge of the tongue, and I'm finding that in the early part of this beer, the passion fruit is lingering there around the edge of the palate too, and it just pushes back some of that floral aromatic character that you'd expect. And then there's some nice, the blackcurrant flavours start to come out a little bit later in this beer, and then it's interesting because then you start to get those candied red fruit, almost figgy characters out of this one that I was mentioning as well. But this is a really nice beer. There's a lot of stuff going on in the aftertaste in this one, and I really like this kind of base recipe that they found for the Berliner Weiss style. So you're going to see some really interesting variants of this, I'm sure, as time goes on with Brekeriet. But like I said, these guys produce some really, really interesting sour beers. This was probably the brewery that got me into sour beers more than anything, because I really didn't like them initially when I first tried them, but there's some really, really nice stuff there. So if you get the chance to try some of these Brekeriet beers, I recommend that you do. And for me, this one is a really, really nice Berliner Weiss, and these guys are doing pretty well with that style, I have to say. In terms of the mouthfeel of this one then, I would say it's kind of light to mid-bodied, probably at the lower end of mid-bodied. The carbonation does have quite a bit of crispness to it, and I always find that with sour beers. I always find them really light and easy drinking, and I'm not sure if that's the kind of sour quality that they have, but to me, this beer does have a good little bit of crispness to it. Yeah, there's quite a wee bit of that. The carbonation, it doesn't have too much of an attack on it, but to me it feels really crisp just because of that sour quality. It's got a bit of an oily but also wet mouthfeel at the same time. It's well balanced between that. There's a little bit of hoppy bitterness to this one, but really not that much at all. It's kind of drowned out a little bit by the fruity characters that this beer has. It's more of a fruity, kind of juicy beer, but there is a lot of there is a good bit of that sharp tart character that you'd expect, and there is a wee bit of sweetness from the malt base as well. But overall, like I said, it's a really, really nice Berliner Weiss, and it reminds me a lot of the sour and salt, just with a slightly different fruit profile. But there's nothing wrong with that, because the sour and salt, as I mentioned, was one of my favourite beers that I had from these guys. As to whether this one kind of Tastes like the cocktail. I'm not quite sure. The blackcurrant definitely would get, but the passion fruit I'm not so sure is what you'd normally find in Purple Rain. But definitely as you go further into the aftertaste, it has a little bit more of what you would expect from the cocktail. Not initially in the beginning, but definitely as you kind of progress further into the aftertaste, you will get a little bit of that Purple Rain kind of feel from it. But it's a really good beer, and I'm glad that I was able to try this one for you guys on the channel. So I hope you've enjoyed my take on it. So yeah, so as always with my reviews then, please let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below, and let me know what your favourite beers have been from Brekeriet as well, and I'm sure I will return to these guys in the future. But this one was the Purple Rain, a lovely Berliner Weiss at 5.3% with some black currants and passion fruit. A really, really interesting beer, and another very solid one from Brekeriet. So until the next time, Slange just now, and I will catch you guys very soon. If you get the chance to try this beer, I really recommend that you do, and anything from this brewery is going to be pretty good, particularly if you enjoy your sour beers. Slange just now.